Can I say that I agree with Deputy Kenny that the normal way of dealing with justice legislation is to have a protracted discussion, pre-legislative scrutiny, and then a detailed committee stage. And we shouldn't vary from that, except to deal with issues that are absolutely imperative. So it was a point I raised during the briefings. There are a number of component parts of this, if you like, omnibus bill. The part dealing with the coroner's existing law, I think there was an acceptance that the coroner's legislation, which was updated last year on foot of actual initiations from the opposition side of the House, with former Deputy Daly putting forward suggestions for the amendment, is a bit of a patchwork right now, and it does need overall consolidation so that we can actually be able to read it as a whole. This bill seeks to deal with a few issues that are now urgent or potentially urgent in the case of a pandemic and COVID-19 being upon us. One is the capacity issue. One coroner is allowed per district under current law, except for Dublin. That seems odd to me. The inability of a coroner or deputy to deal with another district, why would that be the case in law? It's odd. A coroner and deputy coroner can't act concurrently, regardless of the pressure of work, which seems, again, an odd state of affairs. And I know there is an exception in the existing legislation for Dublin in that regard, but even that exemption is for special temporary provision. All of these things, I think, should be generally allowed for in overarching and permanent legislation, the flexibilities to deal with these things, because these are largely administrative issues where legislators should, I think, provide flexibility to react to the absolute needs of the situation, because these are really important matters. I just want to make this point. Coroners' courts, coroners' inquests are really important issues for families concerned. We've all dealt with families who can be consumed by this. And when you have a situation right now where you have a 2-year waiting for some coroner's inquest in Dublin, this is before COVID. That is wholly unacceptable. And we need to provide an administrative infrastructure for that to be rectified. The bill proposes to give statutory authority to the Minister to approve temporary extra coroner capacity in exceptional circumstances. Why would that be the case? Why would you not be able to do that to provide the required number of coroners and the flexibility to move coroners as needs demand? I don't know why it is either time limited or restricted in that manner. Why limit the period where a coroner and deputy can act concurrently to 6 months, as you propose in this legislation? Why not allow it to happen wherever, again, the pressure of work and the requirements allow? Because, as I say, these are matters of the most sensitive nature and are important. I have to gallop through the bill because I only have 10 minutes, but in terms of the civil proceedings proposals, the further advance of the civil proceedings, I actually think this is important, to allow more work to be done remotely. I listened carefully to the comments of my Sinn Féin colleague, but I think the notion of putting individuals in the sort of cages he described in a prison van and then transferring them for hours across the country so they can actually stand for maybe 30 seconds in a court is a ludicrous thing. It is my understanding from the briefing, and for clarity the Minister might in a response make it clear, that this will only apply to limited sets of hearings, and certainly couldn't apply to any hearing, any proper trial, where of course the defendant and the full legal team would have to be present. We all have, I suppose, been challenged by trying to amend our work patterns and work remotely. And I think all of society is doing the same. And I think it would be useful for our court system to catch up with that. We have remote hearings of civil proceedings allowed for since the 2008 Act under Section 26, which now, under this proposal, would be removed. This bill would provide that courts can make directions to conduct a hearing remotely, and I understand that because we don't want a situation where cases could be put off indefinitely if people could object to it. And I think it should be within the remit of a judge who has a seizure of all the information to make that determination and make an order if the administration of justice, in his opinion, so requires. The bill also provides clarity and simplification in the submission of documents of evidence, and I think that's a useful thing. I know that many solicitors have been in touch with me during this COVID crisis, really concerned about electronic filing of documents, about statements of truth, which are now provided for here to substitute for sworn affidavits and statutory declarations. Now, I hear the very strong point made by Deputy Kenny in relation to the business section of this bill, which in truth doesn't sit comfortably in the body of the legislation that is almost exclusively to deal with efficiencies, dealing remotely, to overcome the challenges placed on the court system right now in both civil and criminal matters in relation to COVID-19. I know that the briefing document that the Minister provided us in relation to this says that these proposals follow the recommendations and the draft bill produced by the Law Reform Commission in its 2016 report. Consolidation and reform of aspects of the law of evidence which are based on similar provisions of the Criminal Evidence Act of 1992 in relation to criminal proceedings. The sections in this chapter provide that in civil proceedings, any record in the form of a document compiled in the course of business shall be presumed to be admissible as evidence of the truth. Now, that's an important phrase. Shall be presumed to be admissible as evidence of the truth of the fact or facts asserted in the document. I would be much more comfortable that would be taken out of it, that we would have a time, maybe, I'm a great supporter of the Law Reform Commission. I think they've done incredibly important and good work, and I would, by and large, be minded to support their recommendations. But I think we do need to have the time and the space, not in a 3-hour confined debate like this, to make sure that we're doing right here and that there are no countervailing facts. So I would support the suggestion made by the Sinn Féin deputies that section of the proposals be put in abeyance until we have a different vehicle in the autumn session to give it the proper scrutiny, to bring in expert witness, hear expert testimony before we deal with that. To deal in 2.5 minutes with the criminal aspects of the piece of legislation, the bill proposes to facilitate the prosecution of criminal cases in a COVID world through video links, as I've already said. And I just want the Minister to give clarity in relation to that, to assuage the concerns already expressed by one deputy, that we're talking about the non-trial elements, returns to trial, arraignments and similar matters, and that there will be no circumstances where there would be a proper trial or a hearing taking place without the accused and his full legal team being physically present and able to physically see and cross-examine all witnesses in a normal way, that couldn't be done by video link. Other practical measures that lessen the need to transport prisoners across the country I've already referenced. Remote hearings of state bodies, which is, I think, a useful addition to this, although, again, not something that you might think is germane to a justice bill. I think it is important to put beyond doubt the validity of decisions made by state bodies, which now are increasingly meeting in remote fashion or an online fashion, and I support that. So, in essence, Lascar Corda, I think there are important elements of reform in both the criminal and civil side of the proposals that everybody in this House will have no difficulty in supporting. We just need clarity and confirmation of the briefing that we got from your officials in relation to the scope of this. There are some parts of it that I would actually differ with the view of Deputy Kenny, that I don't think should be timelined. I think in terms of the coroner's provision, it is wholly unacceptable that there be such a 2-year wait for a coroner's inquest in Dublin. And we should make permanent the capacity adjustments that you're proposing in that part of it. So I hope that part of the bill is not timelined. And finally, in relation to the business sections of the bill, which Sinn Féin have tabled an amendment simply to oppose those sections, I think it is the prudent course for the Minister, and I advise accordingly that those sections would not be pressed this evening. They can be either put in a standalone piece of legislation in the autumn session, or accommodated in another piece of legislation where we have the appropriate time, space to give it the scrutiny that they deserve. And then we could have, I think, a consensus to support this legislation across all sections of the House. Thank you.